And here comes the Athletics, Jeff Zrebiec. Looking forward to this
Oh,
conversation.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to give him my
Well,
headset. I'll be with you in just a second.
Yeah. As they work that out, I just wanted to say this. I can't wait to get Jeff on the show, by the way. Bobby and I had a debate if the Pittsburgh Steelers would be less or more or the same scary in terms of threat to the Ravens in the AFC North with Aaron Rodgers. I said I don't think it's more scary, but with Matthew Stafford, it definitely would be. What's up, Jeff Zrebiec?
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah, we're here live from.
Sky.
I know. I was going to say that we got a lot of Baltimore
Yeah,
ties going on
seriously.
right now. How many years did you guys spend together at the
lot.
Sun? Aaron Wilson. That's right. Yeah. So we got a little Baltimore table forming over here. But as everyone knows, we're here in Indianapolis. It's day 2 of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine, and the Athletics. Jeff Zrebiec, kind enough to spend a few minutes. Good to be back in a scrum with you yesterday.
Yeah.
What have been your impressions so far from a Ravens perspective?
Yeah, unfortunately, this has kind of gotten hijacked by the Justin Tucker allegations and all that, and that's sort of been the main takeaway. But otherwise, like the bigger picture stuff, I think this draft class fits really well with the Ravens' needs. I think it's a good year to have 11 picks because I think it's kind of a depth draft, not a superstar-studded draft. So, I think it'll be an interesting couple weeks because what we haven't heard this week is how they're going to create cap space and what they're going to do. And it sounds like they have a lot of moves up their sleeve. We'll see which ones they're going to be able to execute and when. But look, free agency starts really quickly after this. There's not been much of a break, so it'll go right into that, and it's a real busy time for those guys.
Hey, Jeff, so let's start with that, with creating cap space, because there is little to none, even with the increased cap projection that's out there. Can we start, because I don't think anybody's talking about this, but we had Brian McFarland on the show a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about Lamar Jackson's contract and how that could be an obvious place. Now, for sure, they're going to have to address his contract next offseason. But nobody's really talking about the possibility of them getting a year ahead of it.
Yep.
What are you hearing? Are they even going to try? Like, have they broached the topic? What's the idea there?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Eric acknowledged he plans to head down to South Florida at some point to talk to Lamar. I mean, he's not just going to sit on the beach somewhere. I'd imagine they understand the importance of kind of getting ahead of this by the year. And look, you get that deal done, you get an extension done, you really don't have to make any other cost-cutting moves. That's how they're going to cut a couple guys, and there'll be other things they have to do. But the amount of cap that would save just by getting that done, not only the burden it would ease for next offseason. I mean, I think his salary cap hit the following 2 seasons are in the 70 million range. So you're going to have to do it at some point. So it makes sense to be proactive and at least see if there's a deal you can make. I mean, like, I'd imagine just going to say, hey, Lamar, we'd like you to make you the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Are you interested? And you go from there, because that's what it's going to take, obviously, and he deserves that. So we'll see. I think we all have it in our heads how difficult that process was last time they did it. So it feels kind of a daunting thing to do on such a tight time frame. But these guys, they're always working something. I mean, for all we know, they could have had this up their sleeves for a while. And Lamar doesn't have an agent, so that wouldn't get out on his end. So I think Eric DeCosta has recognized the importance of keeping stuff quiet when it comes to Lamar. He likes that. He wants the secrecy. He does not want stuff getting out about that. So it would not surprise me if at some point they really make a push to kind of get that done, recognizing the importance of having that cost certainty going forward and, getting ahead of what they're going to have to do next offseason anyway.
Just want to follow up on that. Sorry, Bobby. I like where you're headed, where you're like, hey, Lamar will make you the highest paid quarterback. And then he's like listening. How many years do you think they could tack on doing that? And would it need to be done by March 12th?
I don't think so, because I think there's other moves. Look, we all know the Ravens are not going to come out free agency like gangbusters and, sign this guy, that guy, and that guy. I mean, they're just not going to do that. They have enough room to do a couple things already. I think there's other things that we could get into. But Marcus Williams is formality. I don't think we'll see Arthur Millette still here after March 10th. Maybe they revisit that, but there's a couple of million there that I think they get. There's other moves they can make, little things. Maybe you reach a small extension or Darius Washington to cut down that tender number. All things like that, and Nick Matty has been working on all this stuff. So I think they have some stuff like that up their sleeve. And what I'm kind of saying is, like, I don't think it's urgent that they have the Lamar thing done, but they're not just going to need money on March 10th. They're going to need to do it. This is going to be a off-season thing. I mean, some of their best free agent moves are usually ones they do later in the off-season. So I could see that as something. Look, yes, it helps with the cap situation this year, but we're just getting ahead of a major thing on our to-do list for next offseason. As for how many years, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think it's going to depend on what Lamar values, how they structure everything. But they kind of need to even that out a little bit, because right now with how high it gets the following 2 years, it's not really viable for them to construct a team with that deal as is in the future. This year you can do it, no problem, but it's going to get harder and harder.
So I guess, given the comments made by Eric at the end of the season press conference, essentially saying, like, hey, I want to give him some time to debrief after the season and whatnot, was your interpretation of yesterday's press conference about the South Florida visit upcoming that those haven't taken place yet?
What do you mean, the conversation with Lamar?
Yeah.
Oh, I think Eric has talked to Lamar.
Oh, you do?
Offseason.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they've been in touch. Now, how much have they talked about contracts? I don't know. Certain things have been more quiet this offseason, to be honest. I think part of it is the Tucker thing.
Yeah.
We haven't even heard about the summit. Did they? I assume they went down. That usually happens right around the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lamar is. This started kind of last off season. Lamar is much more involved in everything they do, knowing stuff. They're much more interactive, and I don't think there's an effort ever made to keep him out of that stuff. I just think as Lamar Jackson's grown more comfortable in his status in the organization, and his maturity has improved and all that. I think he's much more comfortable with that give and take with team officials. What does he need? What is he looking for? When should we do this? They figured out that contract between the two of them, a couple years back, and there were some very difficult, tough moments for both. And I think that really strengthened, the relationship between him and the organization, to where another new contract won't be as significant of an undertaking as it is. But I mean, these are still high stakes, difficult deals to do. How quickly could they do a deal like that? I'm not sure. But again, at least your starting point is, look, we're making the highest paid quarterback in the league. I mean, that's where you have to start. Otherwise, it's probably not even worth making the call.
Yeah. I mean, Sarah, those were pretty strong words that we referenced yesterday that Eric used to describe Lamar. Stakeholder partner. I mean, that's
shoddy words.
Some significant labeling. And I guess this is a good segue to talk about his number one guy, his former draft classmate, his security blanket, so on and so forth. And that is Mark Andrews, who's obviously garnered a lot of attention so far this offseason because of the way the offseason started.
Yeah.
What did you make of Eric's comments yesterday?
I've been around Eric enough to know he says nothing by accident. Everything. Like, look, these guys are very prepared. It's not like it was a news flash to him that he was going to be asked about Mark Andrews yesterday. I mean, if you're ranking the top issues of the team or the top questions, Mark Andrews' status is a top 5 thing, and we know that. So yeah. I thought what he said was by no accident. I think I took it as, and I'm not saying this is, this is my interpretation, was he was basically telling 31 other GMs, look, make me an offer. We're not going to move on from this guy for nothing. Like, I don't, maybe I'm totally wrong on this. Maybe they are going to be desperate in cap rate, and that left $11 million, and they need it now. It's just too much to pass up. I don't see how you move on or release a guy like that without getting something in return. And I know the people say, well, you are getting something. You're getting $11 million in cap space to repurpose. You're also weakening. You're also taking away your quarterback's top target, favorite target. You're weakening your offense as a whole. You're weakening your locker room. Look, I get people are down on Mark Andrews because of what happened in Buffalo and some of the postseason stuff, but this guy's a damn good football player, one of the best football players in his position at the NFL. You don't get better by trading Mark Andrews, by getting rid of him. But this kind of stuff happens in business. So my take all along on it is, look, they'll listen on him. If you want to make us an offer, now I don't know what the threshold is for them to pull the trigger. Is it a third-round pick? Can they get maybe a third and you trade Andrews in a fifth? I don't know. It's kind of hard to gauge his value in a lot of ways because he is in the last year of his contract. This is a great tight end draft. Like some people may want to get their own, tight end. Mark does have a lot, Mark's not old, but he's taken a lot of hits over the years, and he's had a couple injuries. So I don't know what the market for him holds, but to me, that was almost Eric's way of saying, look, the ambiguity there to me was a way of saying, hey, another GM, you want him, come make us an offer and we can talk. But I don't think it is a sure thing by any means that he's not going to be on the football team. I think they'd be very comfortable him being back on his current number if they had to. I don't know that an extension is in his future because I think Isaiah Likely is probably, what is he, 4.5 years younger, I think. So Isaiah Likely is the exact guy the Ravens typically pay. I don't know if they go a third contract with Mark over that, but as far as this year, I think they'd be comfortable with him playing out the final year on his deal, or at least keeping their options open from there.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't think you're alone. Certainly me and Bobby had the same interpretation. Like when you're asked, would you listen to trade offers?
Yeah.
And you talk about going into the Ring of Honor. Like if they asked him, hey, would you listen to trade offers for Lamar Jackson? He'd shut that down. He's like, no, Lamar Jackson will be a big part of our team. But he didn't do that for Mark Andrews. So to your point, that doesn't mean he's going to give him away for nothing. And they're certainly not going to just outright cut him because that would be dumb. But I agree with you. He sent a message to the NFL. I'm listening. I'm listening. This is not an Andrew Berry, we're shutting down Myles Garrett conversation.
Yeah.
This is not a EDC, we're shutting down Lamar Jackson conversation. This was, we are open for business.
Yeah. And look, you have to do certain things like that. There's obviously a saying in this organization, it's better to move on a year early than a year late. And if you're looking at it, if he plays out the final year in his deal, you're going to be in a situation where you may lose him for nothing or a future comp pick next year. So maybe you view this as, hey, we can get another day 2 pick. I would think, me personally, I wouldn't trade him for anything less than a 3rd round pick. I think 3rd round pick is where I would think about it. I'm not, maybe if it's a really early 4th, okay. I just don't know. I would, and I would only do that because you're getting 11 million too. But that's just me talking. I don't know how they're thinking about it. I just think he's he's probably a top 5 football player in the NFL at his position. He's your quarterback's one of his closest friends and his favorite, most trusted targets. He exemplifies so many good things. And I also don't like the idea of scapegoating him. And I think you move on from him. And I'm not saying that is, but there's going to be that perception. So, I think you have to get something for him to kind of move on and have it make sense.
Imagine a dude that's so accomplished, going to be in the Ring of Honor, is the franchise leader in touchdowns. Potentially his last snap was what we watched. That wouldn't be a great ending to what was a fairy tale kind of 7 years.
And that's
him.
A proud dude too. That's a proud guy who puts that was the whole thing. All these fans are getting all teed off at him, ticked off. There's nobody more beside himself than Mark Andrews over how that ended.
Yeah, no question. Sarah, are we good to shift to draft related stuff, or how are you doing on time?
I got to go over and see Mike McDonald, but that's not for another 15 minutes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Sarah, where were you going next?
Well, before we go to drafts, my question was, so we don't know what's going to happen with Mark Andrews. Sounded like nearly a done deal, not 100%, but nearly a done deal with Ronnie Stanley. According to what I looked at, even before Ronnie Stanley or say Pat Ricard, already 80% of the starters are under contract for 2024. And then if they get Ronnie back, that's a huge piece. So knowing that this is kind of a run it back type situation, Jeff, what are you hearing inside the organization that will be like, okay, this is what's going to get us over the hump this time? What is it that they're holding on to say, okay, we're running it back with the majority of our team, but this time it'll be different because why?
Yeah, that's such a tough question because how do you like? We're talking about that team that has consistently shown they're one of the best teams in the NFL during the regular season, and they haven't done it by mopping up on slappies and tomato cans. I mean, they've beaten some of the best teams in the league handily, so you can't say they're not good enough to win a Super Bowl. I mean, they
Mhm.
are. They've been good enough to win a Super Bowl, but how do you go from a team that has just not been very clutch in the postseason and tends to bring out the worst of itself in the postseason? Like, how do you bring that group over the hump? Because it's not a talent issue. It's not an injury issue. This team's been healthy the last couple years. This team's as talented as any team in football. I do think part of it, I think one thing they have to do, and this sets up kind of with the draft. I think you need to get better on both the line of scrimmages. I mean, it's the age-old thing in football. You win the game if you win the trenches, and I mean, I think we saw in the Super Bowl. I mean, the Eagles were out of control. They had the best offensive line in football, and their ability to create four-man, pressure with just four, not even having to blitz on Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that was the difference in that game. And I think the Ravens could get stronger up front. The one thing I don't know how you do, but I just think would be a huge piece. I just don't know how you pull it off with salary cap is if you could get one of these. It's so hard to get off the field in defensively late in games, right? I mean, the offenses have such an advantage. If you could get one of these game-changing defensive players, a guy who teams have to game plan for, keeps offensive coordinators up at night all week, but just a guy who late in the fourth quarter you need to stop and he has the ability to get the ball out or sack the quarterback or I mean, but there's only so many of those guys. And yeah, there's rumors that some are available. Maybe Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett's not getting traded to the Ravens, so we can cross him off the list. But, if they could find a way to get one of those guys and fit him within the salary structure, that would be great. But that's just so hard to do. There's only so many of those guys out there, and the ones that are out there are just so expensive.
Well, I guess that is a good segue here to what you did this morning. You spent your morning chatting with some of the prospects, or some of the edge rushers and interior defensive line guys. Was that who was here this morning?
Yeah. Edge rushers, defensive line. I also talked to the kickers, which if I never have to do that again, that would be great. Nothing against kickers, but it just did feel like the best use of my time.
Is anyone in front of them at the podium? Because a couple of these guys
said you feel bad.
Oh, it's terrible. They're up at the podium, right? And maybe like a Mason Graham or something's off to the side, and he's getting smothered.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I'm just going to go ask this dude how's his day going.
Yeah, exactly. You feel bad. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they didn't get the riser treatment here. They got the corner little table treatment where they had to share a table.
Really?
Like they had the Florida and the Florida State kicker, who I'm sure aren't probably friends given the rivalry between the two schools, sharing a table. So, but yeah, you had to. I hate the. Did you meet with the Ravens? Did you meet with the Ravens? And like a couple of kickers are like, yeah, we met with all 32 teams. I think there's only 5 of them here, so I think they just all bring them in a room. All the special teams coaches are in there, and you knock that out. But like this was a defensive line day. Edge rushers. The edge rusher class is really impressive. Now, if who knows what's going to happen? Like between now and then with free agents and all that stuff. But if I was to put my money on one position that they'd address with their 27th pick, I would say edge rusher. Like they don't even go in with that certainty, but you look at the kind of player and how many of them are and what could be available at 27, that position I would say would have to be considered one of the leaders in the clubhouse. But yeah, just in general, like we'll have plenty of time to talk about the individual draft prospects and break that down. I'm kind of more looking at for a story this week, in addition to what I've done, just about kind of this whole, for years, Ravens used to talk about building the team from inside out, right? Like getting as strong as possible up front. I think the Eagles reminded everybody that that's the best way to win big, and to put yourself over the hump there by getting stronger on both lines of scrimmage. So that's kind of what I was looking for today, and just talking to different people. And look, the Chiefs GM came right out and said, I think every team here is looking to get better offensive line and defensive line. I mean, that's probably true every year, but especially with what they watched a couple of weeks back with what Philadelphia did to Kansas City.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, we'll get you out of here on this. Just the news of the NFLPA report cards came out. A lot of people talking about John Harbaugh being the 28th graded head coach among the NFL. Bobby and I were talking about how narrow the criteria is for that grade. What's your reaction to his number 28th ranked grade?
Yeah, I think those, and this is a talking point every year with those polls or report cards or whatever you are. I think they have a valuable. I think they're valuable in a lot of ways, but I also think you have to come with some perspective. Like they're valuable because they shine light on parent issues, embarrass teams in a lot of ways, and what's the best way to get teams to address things? You embarrass them publicly, which is exactly what those things do.
Remember the F minus?
Yes, I do remember the F minus. In
And
fact,
now it's a B+, so it works.
yeah, exactly. Man, I was that night that report released, I was on the same plane with Steve Saunders. It was not a pleasant trip.
Really?
Yeah, I just kind of, hey Steve, I'm gonna go sit in the back. But
Well,
yeah,
then
I did
remember too, Bateman quote tweeted Sarah's like transcription of something, and he ripped
was Eric
EDC.
DaCosta.
Remember that?
Oh yeah.
That was all within like a 24-hour period.
And the underrated thing about the Ravens week from where, that is the same week where Lamar Jackson contacted Eric DaCosta and said, I want to trade. That was all at the combine. It was Bateman going after Eric. It was Lamar, because the trade didn't come out till owners' meetings, but he actually requested it here.
Yeah.
And then there was obviously the report card. But no, getting back to the surveys, so I think they serve a really good purpose. I think it's been good that they do that. I just don't know enough information to draw like extreme, like they say it's from what? The votings come from August to November. Like, first of all, how many players in the Ravens voted? I didn't see that number. I know they put out like what team had the most votes, what team had the least. I don't know where the Ravens fall in. B, where the majority of players voted in August. So we got a bunch of undrafted free agents who were not on the team come September 1st, or veterans who were just kind of camp bodies who were cut anyway and didn't like the fact that they weren't getting reps in practice, and they complained about Harbaugh. I just don't know enough to draw definitive conclusions on what that all means. I was also, mediocrity in class was always good for me. I was kind of a B student anyway. So we're all complaining about a B for the head coach. And it's just like, what did he get? A B+ last year, I think. So we went down to half a letter grade in a year. I don't know. I don't draw a whole lot from that, because I remember talking to some veterans last year, and I think they got trashed in like travel. Like they didn't do very well in travel last year. And I think it was Van Noy was one of the guys. Marlon may have been the other. I forgot Marlon. But it's like travel. I mean, Kyle Van Noy has been on a bunch of different teams. And he says he thought their travel was as good as he's seen. So
yeah, well, and they went up this year, and one of the notes was that the veterans don't have to spend the night at the hotel at home games. So I think that probably propped them up on the travel.
Yeah. And they always get hit hard in family. And I think some of it comes from the family room at M&T Bank Stadium. It's not that good. Okay, like come on.
Like a sweet family room?
Well, it's just small. No, after the game, like the family room, the meet up with family after. It's just, so some of the stuff I think is kind of nonsense. But without knowing more about like who voted, when they voted, it's just hard to kind of take too much from it. And I mean, there was no terrible grades. I mean, at the very least, everything was pretty much mediocre.
John's was like the worst ranked grade. Yeah.
And he got a B, and he's the 20th ranked coach. So,
but your sense of players feeling towards John just from being in the locker room every day?
I have never, there's always guys who have an issue with their role, who get ticked off about not playing or, something in particular of the game plan. But I think one of the, John clearly, if you're criticizing him, there's some flaws that, like every coach. But one of the things I always thought is his strengths is his ability every year to hold the locker room no matter what they were going through. I'd never, since, early on, even before I started covering the team, and I think I started during the 2011 season, early on there was all that talk about, like they wanted Rex. So it was tough for John early on. Then they had the mutiny during the so-called mutiny in the Super Bowl. But over the last 10 years or so, I've never gotten the impression that his grasp on the locker room has been challenged at all. I mean, I think a lot of the veterans like that kind of set the tone in there, the Roquan Smiths, the Marlon Humphreys, the Mark Andrews, the Derrick Henrys. I think they have an awful lot of respect for the head coach. They're ready to play almost all the time. I mean, nobody's perfect, but they're consistently ready to play. I don't get the sense that. I mean, somebody actually asked me on Twitter whether that's a fireable offense to get a B. I would be running victory laps around my living room if I got a B.
Right.
So,
AP Calc and whatnot.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
God, I was a horrific AP student. I'll tell you that. But there you have it. And he's going into one more year left on his contract, right? For Harbaugh, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it'll be interesting in owners' meetings, which is
Late March.
Late March.
Yeah.
That's where Bisciotti in the past has announced his contract extension. I mean, they just take it as like it's no big deal. Unless I heard otherwise, unless John just says, "Hey, let's play out this year," we'll see. I've given no indication that they don't want this to continue. And Steve Bisciotti is on the record in the past as saying he doesn't like lame duck coaches. So
Yeah.
I would think there's a deal to be worked out if John is willing.
And all of a sudden you look up and it's the second longest tenured head coach.
I know, it's crazy.
There you have it. But I know you have a podium setting availability for Mike Mack, right?
Yep. Yeah. Mike talks at 1 o'clock. I don't really, it's
Oh.
always good listening to him.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's a guy one of the coolest parts of our job is when you see a young coach, young player, like early on, how uncomfortable, like Mike used to be uncomfortable in front of the media.
Hated it.
And just to see the growth, the point he's a head coach and
Yeah.
and he's leading a locker room. I kind of like situations. Those are kind of the coolest parts of our job, just to see the growth and development and how kind of players and coaches kind of find themselves, in front of the room
Yeah.
and in a significant role.
Especially when it's such a likable dude.
Yeah,
too.
great
So,
dude. Yeah.
and still, 34, 35? I know Zach's 32.
Yeah.
Mike's somewhere around there, mid-30s. So it's the youthful infusion. Kevin Stefanski just walked by a second ago. Looks like he's heading to a podium. So, Jeff, we appreciate the time, man. It was great.
Lot,
it was
guys.
great catching up with
great
you.
talking to you.
And let everybody know, you already referenced it a couple times, what you got coming up on The Athletic this week.
Yeah. This guy, I'm going to do a story kind of about the roster a little bit here this week and kind of going back to the old Ravens, like building from the inside out, addressing the offensive line. But, it's going to be a interesting couple of weeks. I think we have a mandatory mock draft due next week, which you can tell by my eye roll how much I enjoy mock drafts. But I also do something called Will They Stay or Will They Go, like a free agent piece, looking at their 18 free agents and predicting, and then it's kind of the way I grade myself to see how many I got right. But, it'll be interesting this year because you look at their 18 free agents and I would say almost 2/3 of them are going to be like 1 year league minimum type guys. Like this is just no disrespect for them, but this is just not a star-studded free agent class for them. And if they knock out Ronnie Stanley before free agency, which they really hope to do, it would lower the, that class even further.
I was going to say, Eric was so forthcoming yesterday.
know.
Don't you feel like the next few weeks is already kind of set in stone what you can expect?
That was John saying he'll probably be back. That's interesting.
How about that, right?
But usually, free agency is tough. Anything can happen.
Oh, yeah.
There was none of that yesterday, which I found interesting.
I was like, I'm going to ask Eric. And then he deferred to John. I was like, all right, I'll ask John. And he probably, all right, we got our news. So anyway, but Jeff, we appreciate you and hope to catch up with you again at some point this offseason.
It's always great talking to you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Have a good rest of the day.